My name is Franklin Reyes, and at 78 years old, I never thought my final years would be marked by such profound shame. I still remember the exact moment my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, standing on those church steps, dressed in my only decent suit, when my nephew Josh looked me straight in the eyes and said words that haunt me to this day. "Mom, you weren't invited. Go home." "Mom, I'm not." The word hit me like a physical blow as whispers erupted around us. Why would he call me that? What terrible secret had poisoned his mind against me? The box of cassette tapes I'd recorded decades ago trembled in my aging hands. Tapes containing truths I should have shared long ago. Truths about Vietnam, about my brother Thomas's dying wish, about a promise made between gunfire that would shape the next 50 years of our lives. This is a story about family bonds tested beyond breaking, about secrets buried so deep they change the very foundation of who we think we are. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from those closest to you, or wondered if love, real love, can survive decades of necessary lies, then join me on this painful journey through memories that refuse to stay buried. Follow this channel, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Some stories need to be heard, even when the truth hurts more than the lies ever did. My name is Franklin Reyes, and at 78 years old, I never imagined my final years would be marked by such profound shame. The morning of my nephew Josh's wedding dawned with a deceptive brightness that belied the darkness waiting to engulf me. I remember how my arthritic fingers trembled as I buttoned up the only decent suit I still owned, a navy blue one, frayed at the cuffs but carefully pressed for the occasion. "You look handsome, old man," I told my reflection, trying to calm the storm brewing in my chest. The mirror showed a face weathered by decades of hard work and quiet sacrifice. Deep creases around my eyes, silver hair combed neatly to the side, and eyes that had seen too much yet somehow still held hope. Josh, the boy I'd raised as my own after my brother died in Afghanistan. Josh, who'd slept in my arms through nightmares and celebrated every birthday with my homemade chocolate cake. Josh, whose college tuition I'd paid by working double shifts at the factory well into my 70s. My Josh was getting married today, and despite not receiving an invitation, I convinced myself it must have been lost in the mail. What else could explain such an oversight? I carefully wrapped my gift, a shoebox containing cassette tapes I'd recorded back in the 80s. Nothing valuable to most, but priceless in the story they told. A story I'd waited too long to share. The walk to the white wooden church in Springfield took longer than it should have. My hip gave me trouble these days, but I refused to take a cab. Wanted to arrive with dignity, you see. People passed by in their cars, some honking in friendly greeting. Springfield was that kind of town where even strangers waved hello. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery even stopped to offer me a ride, but I politely declined. This journey felt important to make on my own 2 feet. The church looked beautiful that day. White roses and baby's breath adorning the entrance, sunlight catching the stained glass windows and casting rainbow shadows across the steps. I could hear organ music drifting through the open doors. Guests in colorful dresses and sharp suits milled about outside, laughing and taking photographs. I straightened my tie one last time, clutched my modest gift, and approached with as much confidence as my trembling legs would allow. That's when I saw him, Josh, handsome in his tuxedo, greeting guests at the entrance. My heart swelled with pride. The little boy who once couldn't tie his shoelaces now stood tall and dashing, about to start a new chapter of his life. His eyes met mine, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something flash across his face. Recognition, then something darker, something cold. Before I could reach him, he stepped forward, his expression hardening into a mask I'd never seen before. "Mom," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the church steps. "You weren't invited. Please leave." The word mom hit me like a physical blow. Mom? I'm not... I opened my mouth, but no sound emerged. The guests around us fell silent. Someone gasped. A woman I didn't recognize, his fiancée perhaps, looked between us with wide, confused eyes. "I don't understand," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Josh, it's me, Uncle Frank." "Everyone knows the truth now," he replied, his voice ice cold. "You need to go." A man I didn't recognize placed his hand on Josh's shoulder, supportively, protectively. The crowd began to whisper. I felt dozens of eyes on me, some curious, some pitying, some clearly entertained by this unexpected drama. "Is everything okay?" someone asked. "It's fine," Josh replied without looking away from me. "Just an uninvited guest." The shoebox felt suddenly heavy in my hands. I tried to offer it to him, this last piece of truth I had kept safe for so long, but he stepped back as if it might burn him. "Whatever lies you've recorded in there, I don't want to hear them," he said. "Mom, you weren't invited. Go home." Again, that word. Mom. It echoed in my head like a bell-tolling disaster. I lowered my hand slowly, clutching the box to my chest. Something irreparable was happening, but I couldn't grasp what or why. All I knew was that my boy, the child I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for, was looking at me as if I were a stranger. No, worse, as if I were an enemy. I turned away before anyone could see the tears forming in my eyes. Decades in the military and years of hard labor had taught me one thing, if nothing else. Never let them see you break. My walk back home was a blur of confusion and heartache, the beautiful spring day now seeming like a cruel joke. That night, alone in my small house filled with photographs of a life apparently built on sand, I sat in my recliner with the shoebox on my lap. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing the neatly labeled cassettes inside. Memories recorded in plastic and magnetic tape, truths I thought would wait until after I was gone. The old cassette player had been my father's, a relic from another time, much like me. The mechanism creaked as I pressed the aged plastic buttons. And then, through the static and the years, a voice emerged. My voice, younger and stronger but heavy with the burden of secrets. "Josh," my recorded voice began, "there are some things about our family that you should know. Things about your father, about Louise, and about me. Things I should have told you long ago but never found the courage to say to your face." I listened in the darkness, my tears finally falling freely as forgotten truths whispered back to life. The cassette hissed and crackled, but the words were unmistakable. Words that might explain why my son had called me Mom and looked at me with such contempt. Words that came decades too late. Outside, a spring storm began to gather, thunder rolling across the Springfield sky like judgment. But inside, in the quiet of my living room, the real storm was just beginning to break. It was the summer of 1968, the air in Vietnam so thick with humidity you could almost drink it. I was 21 years old, scared out of my mind but trying not to show it as our transport plane descended toward Da Nang. My brother Thomas sat beside me, his knee bouncing nervously against mine, though his face remained stoic. He was always the stronger one, 2 years older and infinitely braver. We'd both been drafted within months of each other, but ending up in the same unit? That was something of a miracle. Or perhaps not a miracle at all. "You boys stick together," our mother had said the day we shipped out, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. What I didn't know then was that she'd threatened to sue the army if they separated us. Mom was like that, 5'0" of pure determination. She'd already lost Dad to a heart attack. She wasn't about to lose both her sons to opposite ends of a jungle war. The heat hit us like a furnace when we stepped off that plane. Thomas grabbed my shoulder and said, "We're in it now, little brother." I remember nodding, pretending I wasn't terrified, pretending I was ready for whatever came next. God, we were so young. Our first weeks in country passed in a blur of training, patrol rotations, and sleepless nights punctuated by distant explosions. We shared everything. Sea rations, letters from home, cigarettes, and fears we wouldn't admit to anyone else. During those quiet moments in the darkness of our tent or huddled in muddy trenches, we'd whisper about life after the war. "I'm gonna marry Louise when I get back," Thomas told me one night as monsoon rain hammered our tent. Louise Thompson was his high school sweetheart, a pretty girl with auburn hair who'd promised to wait for him. "She's pregnant, Frank," Found out just before we shipped out. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd always had feelings for Louise, feelings I'd buried deep out of loyalty to my brother. Now she was carrying his child. Thomas pulled out her photo from his breast pocket, the edges worn from constant handling. "If anything happens to me," he started. "Don't talk like that." I cut him off. "No, listen," he insisted, his voice dropping lower. "If anything happens to me, I need you to promise you'll look after them. Louise and the baby. They'll be family. Your family." "Nothing's going to happen to you," I said firmly, but I made the promise anyway. How could I not? What I couldn't tell him, what I would never tell him, was how that promise both honored and tortured me. To care for the woman I'd secretly loved, and a child that could have been mine in another life. But that was the thing about Thomas. He always got there first, whether it was climbing the tallest tree in our backyard or winning Louise's heart. April 17th, 1968. The date is burned into my memory like a brand. We were on patrol near the village of Dongha when everything went to hell. The first explosion threw me to the ground, ears ringing, dust filling my lungs. Gunfire erupted from the tree line, sharp cracks that sent us diving for cover. "Get down," Thomas shouted, pulling me behind the remnants of a stone wall. We returned fire, the M16 kicking against my shoulder as sweat poured down my face. For 20 minutes that felt like 20 years. We held our position, watching men from our unit fall one by one. When there was a lull in the shooting, Thomas grabbed my arm. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, his eyes wild with adrenaline. "We need to move to that ridge." He pointed to a small hill about 50 yards away. "Cover me, then follow." I nodded, raised my rifle, and laid down suppressing fire as Thomas sprinted toward the ridge. He was halfway there when I saw the muzzle flash from the trees. Thomas jerked backward, stumbled, but kept running. He made it to the ridge and waved me over. I ran, bullets kicking up dirt around my feet, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. When I reached Thomas, he was sitting with his back against a rock, his hand pressed to his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Not as bad as it looks," he gasped, but I knew he was lying. The bullet had caught him high in the chest, just below the collarbone. I tore open a field dressing and pressed it against the wound. "Medic!" I screamed, my voice breaking. "We need a medic over here!" Thomas grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "Frank," he said, his voice suddenly calm. "I need to tell you something about Louise, about the baby." "Save your strength," I urged, pressing harder on the wound as blood continued to flow. He shook his head. "No time. The baby, it might not be mine." The world seemed to stop. "What are you talking about?" Thomas coughed, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. "Louise and we had a fight before I left. She was with someone else. Just once," she said. He paused, fighting for breath. "She doesn't know for sure. But if it's not mine, it doesn't matter," I said fiercely. "Your blood or not, it's your child." He nodded weakly. "Promise me again. Take care of them both." "I promise," I said, tears mixing with the sweat on my face. "But you're going to be fine. The medic is coming." Thomas smiled faintly. "Always were a terrible liar, little brother." His eyes fixed on something distant. "Tell Louise I forgive her. And tell the baby about me, will you? The good parts." The medic arrived moments later, but Thomas was already slipping away, his blood soaking into the Vietnamese soil. His last words, barely audible above the renewed gunfire, were, "Take care of Louise. And the baby. Promise, Frank." I held his body until they forced me to let go. 3 weeks later, I was sent home with a Purple Heart and a Silver Star they said Thomas would have wanted me to have. I carried something else too, a secret that would shape the next 50 years of my life, a promise made between gunfire that would become both my purpose and my prison. What no one knew, what Louise herself never fully knew, was exactly what Thomas had told me that night, a secret about that baby, that he might not have been Thomas's, And I kept that secret like a tomb, buried deep where no light could reach it. Until now. Coming home from Vietnam was like stepping into someone else's life. Springfield looked exactly the same. The maple trees lining Main Street, Mr. Peterson's hardware store with its perpetually squeaking sign, the courthouse with its proud clock tower. But I was different, hollowed out. A walking ghost with Thomas's dog tags still hanging around my neck, the metal cool against my skin even on the hottest days. I remember standing outside Louise's small apartment on Maple Drive, my duffel bag heavy on my shoulder, my mouth dry as cotton. It took me 3 attempts to knock on that faded green door. When it finally swung open, Louise stood there with dark circles under her red-rimmed eyes and a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. "Frank," she whispered, my name falling from her lips like a stone. No smile, no tears. Just a flat recognition that sliced through me. The baby, Joshua, was barely 2 months old. Tiny fingers, a tuft of dark hair, eyes that seemed too knowing for a newborn. I stared at him, searching for Thomas in his features, but seeing only possibilities, questions I couldn't ask. "He has your brother's nose," Louise said, as if reading my thoughts. There was something defensive in her tone, a subtle challenge. Was she convincing me or herself? She invited me in with the reluctance of someone fulfilling an obligation. The apartment was small, a living room with faded furniture, a kitchenette with unwashed dishes piled high, a single bedroom where a makeshift crib stood next to a rumpled bed. The air smelled of sour milk and something else. Despair, maybe. "I'm sorry about Thomas," I said, the words woefully inadequate. Louise nodded stiffly. "They told me he died a hero." "He did," I lied. There was no heroism in his death, just the random cruelty of war. But sometimes lies are kinder than truth. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled only by Joshua's soft breathing. Then Louise asked the question I'd been dreading. Did Thomas say anything? At the end? I swallowed hard. "He said to take care of you both, that he loved you." I couldn't tell her the rest. About her betrayal, about Thomas's doubt. The doubt that was now my burden to bear. That first night, I slept on Louise's couch, waking every time Joshua cried. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would honor my promise to Thomas. I would care for his family, or what might be his family. But I would do it as Uncle Frank, the responsible brother-in-law who steps in during a crisis. Nothing more. I found work at the Springfield manufacturing plant, operating the metal press on the midnight shift. The pay wasn't great, but it covered the rent on a small 2-bedroom house on Elm Street, where Louise and Joshua moved with me a month later. Separate bedrooms, separate lives under one roof, bound by grief and a promise. Louise retreated into herself, spending days staring out windows or sleeping until afternoon. When she did interact with Joshua, it was with mechanical efficiency, changing, feeding, bathing, but little warmth. The bottle of whiskey in her nightstand emptied with alarming regularity. "He's not mine," she said one night, after too many drinks, her words slurring together. "He's not Thomas's either." My heart froze. "What are you talking about?" She laughed, a hollow sound. "Don't pretend you don't know. Thomas must have told you." I remained silent, and she took my silence as confirmation. "I made a mistake," she continued. "One stupid night with Robert from the bank. Thomas and I had a fight, and I was weak." She took another swig from her glass. "Thomas forgave me, said we'd raise the baby as ours no matter what. But now he's gone, and I'm stuck with a child who reminds me every day of my mistake. Joshua is innocent in all this," I said firmly. "Is he?" Louise's eyes flashed with anger. "Every time I look at him, I see my failure. I see Thomas dying in a jungle halfway across the world while I was—" She couldn't finish. After that night, Louise's drinking worsened. There were days when she couldn't, or wouldn't, get out of bed. I became Joshua's primary caretaker, learning through trial and error how to change diapers, prepare formula, soothe a colicky baby in the small hours of the morning. I registered Josh as my nephew, not because of any legal requirement, but because that's what everyone in town assumed. The heroic uncle stepping in after tragedy. The Reyes family name continuing through Thomas's son. No one questioned it. No one suspected the truth might be more complicated. As Joshua grew from infant to toddler to little boy, it was me who taught him to walk, to tie his shoes, to ride a bicycle. It was me who soothed his nightmares and celebrated his victories. Louise became a shadow in his life, present but distant, a mother who never claimed the title. For the outside world, I crafted a careful narrative. Thomas, the fallen war hero. Louise, the grieving widow overwhelmed by single motherhood. And me, the devoted uncle fulfilling a promise to my brother. Simple, clean, far from the messy reality. When Joshua turned 9, we were eating dinner, spaghetti with meatballs, his favorite, when he asked the question that sent ice through my veins. "Uncle Frank, why is my middle name Franklin?" I nearly choked on my food. "What?" "My name," he said, twirling pasta around his fork with the careful concentration of a child. "Joshua Franklin Reyes. I'm named after you, right?" From the other end of the table, Louise's head snapped up, her eyes suddenly clear and alert. We hadn't discussed this, never prepared for it. "Your father wanted it that way," I said carefully. "He thought it would be a nice tribute to me since we were close." Joshua seemed satisfied with the explanation, but that night after he went to bed, I found myself sitting in my basement with an old tape recorder my father had left me. I pressed record, and for the first time began to document the truth. Not for me, but for Joshua, for when he was old enough to understand, for when I was gone. "Joshua," I spoke into the microphone, my voice sounding strange in the quiet basement. "There are things about our family you should know someday. Things about your father, your mother, and me." That was the first of many recordings, confessions, explanations, apologies stored on magnetic tape and hidden away in a shoebox. Insurance against a future where truth might matter more than the comfortable lies we'd built our lives around. I never imagined that those tapes would one day be the only evidence of my side of the story, that they would become my last desperate attempt to explain to Joshua why his uncle had given him a middle name that carried more weight than anyone could know. The weight of the Reyes name, a name that wasn't his by blood, but by choice, by promise, by love. Louise died on a Tuesday, October 19th, 1983, a day like any other until it wasn't. I remember the morning with painful clarity, the smell of coffee brewing, the sound of rain against the windows, Josh complaining about his math homework at the kitchen table. Louise had been sober for almost 6 months by then, the longest stretch since Thomas died. She'd found a job as a receptionist at Dr. Mitchell's dental office, started attending church again, even joined a book club that met on Wednesday nights. I'd begun to hope that maybe, just maybe, we were turning a corner. "Frank, can you drop Josh at school today? I'm running late," Louise called from upstairs, her voice stronger than it had been in years. I agreed, watching 15-year-old Josh roll his eyes at being treated like a child. He'd grown tall for his age, with Thomas's strong jaw and dark eyes, but there was something in the way he tilted his head when concentrating that reminded me painfully of Robert from the bank. I'd seen him around town occasionally, married now with children of his own, nodding politely when we passed on the street, neither of us acknowledging the secret that linked us. "Come on, kiddo, I'll let you drive the truck down the driveway," I offered, which erased Josh's irritation immediately. He was obsessed with getting his learner's permit the minute he turned 16. "Bye, Mom," Josh shouted up the stairs. Louise's muffled response came back, something about being home for dinner. Such an ordinary exchange. If I'd known it was the last time Josh would speak to his mother, would I have made him go back upstairs? Given him a chance for a proper goodbye? These are the questions that haunt you after someone is gone. The mundane moments you didn't realize were precious until they became final. I dropped Josh at Springfield High, watched him join the stream of teenagers flooding through the double doors, then headed to my shift at the plant. It was a normal day. the rhythmic thud of machinery, lunch in the break room with the same men I'd worked alongside for 15 years, the ache in my lower back that never quite went away. I was 57 then, my hair more salt than pepper, my hands permanently calloused from work. The call came at 2:17 p.m. I remember checking my watch when the floor supervisor waved me over, pointing to the phone in his office with an expression that made my stomach drop. "Mr. Reyes, this is Mercy Hospital. We need you to come right away. It's about Louise Thompson." She was already gone when I arrived. A massive heart attack, they said. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. She'd collapsed at work, and despite Dr. Mitchell performing CPR until the ambulance arrived, there was nothing anyone could do. 42 years old, gone in an instant. I sat beside her body in the hospital room, studying the face that had once been so full of life. In death, Louise looked younger somehow, the lines of pain and guilt smoothed away. I took her still warm hand in mine. "I kept my promise, Louise," I whispered. "I'll keep looking after him." The hardest thing I've ever done was telling Josh. I picked him up from school, and something in my face must have given it away, because he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me waiting by the entrance instead of at our usual spot in the parking lot. "What happened?" he asked, his voice cracking with the adolescent changes he was going through. I couldn't say it at first. Not there, with students streaming past us. I led him to the truck, and once inside, with the doors closed against the world, I forced the words out. "Josh, it's your mom. She had a heart attack at work today. The doctors, they couldn't save her." He didn't cry. Not then. He just stared straight ahead, his face eerily calm, and asked in a detached voice, "Was she in pain?" "No," I lied again. "It was very quick. She didn't suffer." The truth was, I didn't know if she'd suffered. I didn't know her final thoughts, or if she'd called out for someone. For Thomas. For Josh. Maybe even for me. Another lie in a life built on necessary falsehoods. The days that followed passed in a blur. The funeral arrangements, the casseroles brought by neighbors, the awkward condolences from people who'd gossiped about Louise for years. Josh moved through it all like a sleepwalker, polite but distant, accepting hugs from well-wishers with rigid formality. He only broke down once at the funeral home when they showed us Louise in her casket. She was dressed in the blue dress she'd worn to Easter service, her hair neatly styled, makeup applied with a mortician's careful hand to mask the gray pallor of death. Josh took one look and bolted from the room. I found him in the parking lot, bent double, finally sobbing with gut-wrenching intensity. "It doesn't look like her," he gasped between sobs. "That's not my mom." I held him while he cried, this boy-becoming man who'd lost both parents before his 16th birthday. "She loved you," I told him, another half-truth to comfort the grieving. Louise had loved Josh in her way, but it was a complicated love, tangled with guilt and resentment. Still, in that moment, Josh needed to believe in a mother's unconditional love, so I gave him that gift. 3 days before the funeral, while Josh was staying with a friend, I was cleaning Louise's room, boxing her clothes for donation, organizing the few pieces of jewelry she'd owned, trying to decide what to keep for Josh's future wife someday. Between the mattress and box spring, I found a sealed envelope with my name written across it in Louise's precise handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. "Frank," the letter began, the handwriting uncharacteristically unsteady. "If you're reading this, I've finally found the courage to end things, or fate has done it for me. Either way, I'm sorry for the burden I've placed on you all these years. Josh is not mine, not in the ways that matter. He's yours now, completely, but he can never know the truth. Never. He would hate me. You are everything he has. Me, I'm just the shadow that failed him. Failed all of you. Please forgive me for my weakness. Take care of our boy." The letter wasn't dated, but the paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. How long had it been there? Was she planning to take her own life? Or was this written years ago, during one of her darkest periods? And what truth was she referring to? The fact that Robert might be Josh's biological father, or something deeper I still didn't understand. I read the letter twice more, then made a decision. At Louise's funeral, while Josh was accepting condolences from the line of mourners, I slipped the folded letter into Louise's casket, tucking it beneath her folded hands. Some secrets, I decided, deserved to be buried. After the funeral, Josh changed. The open, affectionate boy who'd once followed me around the garage, eager to learn how to fix a carburetor or change oil, became quiet and withdrawn. He spent more time with Thomas's family, my extended relatives who had always treated Louise with thinly veiled contempt. My brother Jack and his wife Susan had never accepted Louise after her indiscretion, as they called it, and had barely tolerated my decision to raise Josh. I noticed Josh spending weekends at their house, coming home with new clothes and attitudes that felt foreign. One Sunday dinner, a month after Louise's death, Susan came to drop Josh off. She lingered in our kitchen, her sharp eyes taking in the modest surroundings with poorly disguised judgment. As Josh went upstairs to put away his overnight bag, Susan leaned close to me, her perfume cloying and too sweet. "You've done enough, Frank," she whispered. "It's time Josh knew who his real family is. Blood matters." Before I could respond, she gave Josh a hug goodbye, whispering something in his ear that made him glance at me with new eyes. Calculating, suspicious eyes that I'd never seen before. From that day forward, Josh never called me Uncle Frank again, just Frank. As if some essential connection had been severed with a single whispered confidence. I wanted to confront Susan, to demand what lies she'd told him, but I feared the truth more than the lies. And so another wall of silence grew between us, joining the many others that had shaped our fractured family for decades. The years have a way of slipping through your fingers like water. One moment Josh was a sullen teenager, slamming doors and staying out past curfew. The next he was packing for college. A full scholarship to the University of Illinois that made my chest swell with pride, even as it ached with the knowledge that our home would soon be empty. I remember the day he left, a crisp September morning in 1986, the maple trees in our yard just beginning to blush with autumn. Josh loaded the last of his boxes into his used Ford Escort, a high school graduation present I'd spent months restoring in secret. The car was nothing fancy, just a '78 model with fresh paint and a rebuilt engine. But seeing his face when I'd handed him the keys had made every late night in the cold garage worth it. "I guess that's everything," he said, closing the trunk with a definitive thud. We stood there awkwardly, neither sure how to navigate this moment. In the years since Louise's death, Josh had grown increasingly distant, spending holidays with my brother Jack's family, working summers at the bank where Robert, his potential biological father, was now branch manager. I'd never confronted him about any of it, too afraid of losing him completely if I pushed. "Call when you get there," I said, shoving my hands in my pockets to stop myself from reaching for a hug he clearly didn't want. Josh nodded. "Thanks for, everything." He gestured vaguely at the car, the house, the life I'd tried to build for him. As he drove away, the morning sun glinting off the rear window, I felt a chapter closing. I'd kept my promise to Thomas, raised his son to adulthood, given him every opportunity I could. But somewhere along the way, I'd lost him all the same. The house felt cavernous after he left. Too quiet, too empty. I worked longer shifts at the plant, took on home repair projects for neighbors, anything to fill the hours in silence. At night, I'd sit in Josh's room, now stripped of posters and personality, and wonder where I'd gone wrong. Time marched on, relentless and unforgiving. Josh graduated college, then law school, moved to Chicago. Visits home became increasingly rare, Christmases every few years, the occasional phone call that felt more obligation than connection. I retired from the plant in 1995 after 30 years, my back permanently curved from decades bent over machinery, my hands arthritic and stiff. Retirement gave me too much time to think, to remember, to regret. So I decided to renovate the basement, a project I'd been putting off for years. It was during this renovation, about 10 years ago now, that I nearly lost those tapes forever. I was clearing out decades of accumulated junk, Old furniture, broken appliances, boxes of Christmas decorations that hadn't seen daylight since Louise was alive. In the farthest corner, covered in a film of dust so thick it looked like gray velvet, I found the shoebox containing the cassette tapes I'd recorded for Josh. My confessions, my truths, my side of a story he might never want to hear. The box was water damaged on one side, the cardboard soft and disintegrating. I carefully opened it, half expecting to find the tapes ruined, but they looked surprisingly intact. I sat on an old milk crate, turning one of the cassettes over in my hands, reading my own handwriting on the yellowed label. For Josh, about your mother, 1987. A lifetime ago. A different man, with different hopes. I carried the box upstairs and placed it on the kitchen table, next to a trash bag and a small pile of items to keep. For a long moment, I stood there, frozen in indecision. What was the point of keeping these tapes? Josh had made his choice years ago, chosen Jack and Susan's version of events, chosen a life that had little room for his odd, solitary uncle. Perhaps it would be kinder, cleaner, to let the past die. To burn these tapes and their painful truths along with the rest of the basement debris. My hand actually reached for the trash bag, fingers curling around the plastic, when the phone rang. A jarring intrusion that startled me out of my thoughts. It was a wrong number, someone asking for a pizza delivery, but that small interruption was enough to stay my hand. I couldn't do it. Couldn't destroy what might be the only record of the truth, however painful or unwanted it might be. Instead, I found a new shoebox, sturdier, plastic instead of cardboard, and carefully transferred the tapes, making sure the labels were still readable. Then I tucked the box away in my bedroom closet, behind winter sweaters I rarely wore in our mild Springfield climate. That same week, idly scrolling through Facebook on the computer Josh had insisted on buying me. It's 2015, Frank, you can't not have a computer anymore. I saw it. A post from a young woman I didn't recognize, tagged with Josh's name. A close-up photo of a diamond ring on a manicured hand with the caption, "She said yes. Can't wait to marry the love of my life, Josh Reyes." I stared at the screen, my chest tight with conflicting emotions. My boy was getting married. And I was learning about it on social media, like a stranger. I clicked on the young woman's profile, Melissa Chen, a pharmaceutical sales representative from Chicago. Pretty, with long dark hair and a wide smile. In the pictures of them together, Josh looked happy, relaxed in a way he'd never been with me in his adult years. I spent an embarrassing amount of time scrolling through their photos, this digital glimpse into a life I wasn't part of. Finally, I forced myself to pick up the phone and dial Josh's number. It went to voicemail, as it often did. I left what I hoped was an appropriate message. Congratulations, happiness for him, a gentle inquiry about meeting his fiancée someday. 2 days later, he called back sounding surprised that I'd found out about the engagement. "We were going to send out announcements next week," he said, his tone politely distant. "It just happened last weekend." "She looks lovely," I offered. "I'd love to meet her." "Sure," he replied in a way that made it clear it wasn't a priority. "Maybe when we come down to visit Aunt Susan and Uncle Jack in the spring, we could stop by." Stop by? Like I was a casual acquaintance, not the man who'd raised him. "That would be nice," I managed, swallowing my hurt. "And Josh, congratulations again. I'm truly happy for you." After we hung up, I went to the closet and pulled out the box of tapes. Sat on my bed and held them in my lap, wondering if now was the time to mail them to him. A wedding gift of truth, for better or worse. But something stopped me. Fear, perhaps. Or the realization that these revelations could taint what should be a happy time in his life. That night, I took the box down to the basement again, now clean and freshly painted, and tucked it into a small fireproof safe I'd installed under the stairs. Not thrown away, not yet given. Just waiting for the right moment, a moment I wasn't sure would ever come. I did search for Josh's wedding announcement in the Springfield Herald the following week, but there was nothing. I checked online and finally found it. in the Chicago Tribune Society pages, with a photo of Josh and Melissa alongside Jack and Susan, identified as the groom's aunt and uncle. No mention of me at all. It was as if I'd been erased from his story entirely. That night I listened to tape number 4 for the first time since recording it. My younger voice filled the room, hesitant at first, then gathering strength. Josh, one day you'll understand that love isn't always fair, but it was sincere. I'd forgotten that line, forgotten how much hope I'd once had that someday we'd bridge the gap between us. Hearing it now, decades later, something stirred in me, a longing to be known, truly known, by the boy I'd given my life to. But as I rewound the tape, careful not to damage the aging magnetic ribbon, I wondered if that chance had passed us by forever. Morning in Springfield has a particular quality to it that I've never found anywhere else. A soft golden light that makes even the most ordinary things seem somehow precious. I was sitting on my front porch, nursing a cup of coffee and watching that light play across Mrs. Henderson's roses across the street, when I noticed the letter carrier approaching. Bill Simmons, third-generation postal worker in Springfield, whose grandfather had delivered mail on horseback during the Depression. "Morning, Frank," he called, climbing the 3 steps to my porch with the familiar stiffness of a man fighting arthritis. "Got something that needs a signature today." I raised an eyebrow. At 76, I rarely received mail requiring signatures, just bills, the occasional catalog, and Christmas cards from former co-workers who remembered me only once a year. Bill handed me a certified letter, crisp white envelope with my name and address typed neatly in the center. No return address. I scrawled my signature on his electronic pad, thanked him, and waited until he'd moved on to the next house before examining the envelope more closely. The postmark was local, mailed from Springfield just 2 days ago. I slid my thumb under the seal and extracted a single sheet of paper, folded precisely in thirds. The handwriting was unfamiliar, a slanted script that spoke of someone educated in a different era. "Mr. Reyes," it began. "We've never formally met, though I believe you know who I am. I've recently received some troubling news about my health, which has forced me to consider matters I've long avoided. There are truths that should be spoken before it's too late. I'd like to meet with you privately to discuss a matter concerning Joshua. Please come to the East Bench in Founders Park tomorrow at 10 a.m. if you're willing to hear what I have to say. I'll be wearing a gray hat. Respectfully, Robert Chase." My coffee grew cold in my hand as I read the letter twice more. Robert Chase. The name had haunted the edges of my life for decades. The man from the bank, Louise's one-night mistake, Josh's possible biological father. The man whose features I sometimes caught glimpses of in Josh's profile when the light hit a certain way. I'd seen him around town over the years, of course. Springfield isn't large enough to avoid anyone completely. We'd exchanged polite nods at the grocery store, made small talk about the weather at community events, but we'd never acknowledged the invisible thread that connected us, the boy we both had claimed to in different ways. That night, I barely slept. Questions circled in my mind like hungry wolves. Why now after all these years? What troubling news had prompted this sudden desire for truth-telling? And most importantly, what did he want from Josh? The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect early autumn day. I dressed with unusual care, pressed khakis, a button-down shirt I usually reserved for church, my good loafers. At 9:45, I parked my aging Buick in the lot at Founders Park and made my way slowly toward the eastern section, where a row of benches faced the small lake. I spotted him immediately, a tall, thin figure seated alone, a gray fedora placed precisely on his white hair. Robert Chase had aged well, his posture still erect despite being roughly my age, his clothes expensive and tailored. The banker who'd done well for himself versus the factory worker with calloused hands and a pension that barely covered expenses. I pushed down the flare of resentment that comparison always triggered in me. He rose when he saw me approaching, extending a hand that bore the smooth skin and manicured nails of someone who'd never done manual labor. "Mr. Reyes, thank you for coming." His voice was deep, cultured, the voice of someone used to being listened to. We shook hands briefly, then sat with a careful distance between us on the green-painted bench. For a moment, neither of us spoke. A pair of ducks skimmed across the lake's surface, leaving ripples in their wake. Finally, Robert cleared his throat. "I have pancreatic cancer," he said without preamble. "Stage 4. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 6, with aggressive treatment." I wasn't sure how to respond. We weren't friends, weren't even truly acquaintances, yet here he was sharing this most intimate of revelations. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said finally. The words inadequate but sincere. He nodded once, acknowledging my sympathy without dwelling on it. When a man faces his mortality, Mr. Reyes, he finds himself reconsidering the choices he's made, the paths not taken, the truths left unspoken. A squirrel darted up a nearby oak tree, drawing his gaze momentarily before he continued. "I believe you know why I wanted to speak with you." He turned to face me fully, his eyes, hazel like Josh's, steady and direct. "It's about Joshua, my son." Though I'd suspected this was coming, hearing the words spoken aloud sent a jolt through me. "You can't know that for certain," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. Robert reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and withdrew a folded document, which he handed to me wordlessly. I opened it with fingers that weren't entirely steady. It was a DNA test result dated just 3 weeks earlier. The conclusion was highlighted in yellow. 99.99998% probability of paternity. "How did you get this?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "Joshua came to me," Robert said quietly. "About a month ago. Said he'd found some old letters of Louise's that suggested possibilities. He wanted to know the truth." The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. Josh had never said a word to me about any of this, had never mentioned finding letters, never asked questions about his parentage, had gone straight to Robert instead, cutting me out entirely. "He's angry with you," Robert continued, seemingly reading my thoughts. "Feels you've lied to him his entire life." I handed the paper back to him, a bitter taste filling my mouth. "I kept my promise to my brother. I raised him as my own, gave him everything I had." "Except the truth," Robert countered, though his tone held no accusation, only a sad certainty. We sat in silence again, watching an elderly couple walk slowly along the path that circled the lake, their arms linked for support. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "Why now?" Robert sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "Because I'm dying, Mr. Reyes. And because, despite biology, despite DNA tests and scientific certainty, I was never Joshua's father." He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "You were." The simple acknowledgement coming from this man of all people hit me with unexpected force. I had to look away, blinking rapidly against the sudden moisture in my eyes. "I had my chance with Louise long ago," he continued softly. "We were young, both engaged to other people. It was one night of weakness that I've regretted in some ways, celebrated in others, because it gave the world Joshua." He glanced at me. "But I was never there for him. Never taught him to ride a bike or helped with homework or sat through a school play. You did all that. You were his father in all the ways that matter." "Then why take the test?" I asked. "Why confirm it now?" Robert's lips twisted in a sad smile. "Because Joshua needed to know. Because he came to me with such anger, such confusion. He'd been told things, by your brother's wife, I believe. Distorted truths that painted you as some kind of deceiver. Susan. Always Susan with her whispers and insinuations. I'd never confronted her, and now it seemed my silence had cost me everything." "What does Josh want now?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I don't know," Robert admitted. "He's processing. Angry at everyone, I think. Louise for her deception, you for your silence, me for my absence." He hesitated, and himself perhaps for believing the worst about the man who raised him. As he spoke, a strange calm settled over me. The secret I'd carried for so long was finally out in the open, no longer mine alone to bear. It should have felt like a relief, but instead, all I could think about was Josh, confused, hurt, trying to piece together a history that had been deliberately obscured at every turn. "I'm not looking to claim him," Robert added quickly. "I just thought, with the time I have left, perhaps we could all find some peace with the past, some forgiveness." Forgiveness. Such a simple word for such a complex emotion. Could Josh forgive me for my lifetime of necessary lies? Could I forgive myself? "Thank you for telling me," I said finally, rising from the bench with the stiffness that accompanied all my movements these days. "I should go." Robert nodded, making no move to stop me. As I turned to leave, he called after me softly. "He has your courage, you know, your sense of justice. Whatever happens, be proud of that." I walked back to my car slowly, my mind replaying our conversation, trying to make sense of this new reality where Josh knew the truth, or at least part of it. What he didn't yet know, what was still hidden in those tapes, was why I'd kept silent for so long. The promise to Thomas that had shaped all our lives, for better or worse. It was time, I decided, to give him those tapes, to let him hear my voice from decades past explaining choices that must seem incomprehensible to him now. Whether he would listen, whether he could understand, that would be his choice. All I could do was offer my truth finally, and hope it wasn't too late. The invitation never came. I waited by my mailbox each day as June approached, checking twice sometimes, running my fingers along the back of the metal box to make sure nothing had gotten stuck. But deep down, I knew. Josh didn't want me at his wedding. The realization settled in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold. I learned the details from Marge at the grocery store. Her daughter was friends with a cousin of Melissa's, and small-town gossip travels faster than formal announcements. June 18th at First Presbyterian Church in Springfield, not Chicago as I'd expected, but right here in our hometown. A reception to follow at the Willow Creek Country Club, the same country club that had denied my membership application 30 years ago because factory workers didn't fit the club's atmosphere. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 2 weeks I debated what to do. Showing up uninvited seemed desperate, pathetic even. But not attempting to be there felt like surrendering, like confirming whatever lies Susan had told him about me. In the end, I compromised. I wouldn't go to the ceremony, wouldn't risk causing a scene that might ruin Josh's day. But I would try one last time to give him the tapes, to offer my truth, whether he wanted it or not. The morning of the wedding dawned painfully beautiful. Clear blue skies, temperature in the mid-70s, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of early summer roses. Perfect weather for a perfect day. I sat at my kitchen table in my bathrobe, drinking coffee that had gone cold, staring at nothing. Around noon, I finally moved. Showered, shaved with extra care, combed my thinning hair. From the back of my closet, I retrieved my only suit, navy blue, purchased for Louise's funeral and rarely worn since. It hung loose on my frame now. I'd lost weight in recent years without really noticing. I cinched the belt tighter, straightened the tie I'd had to watch a YouTube video to remember how to knot, and studied my reflection. An old man looked back at me, the lines on his face telling stories of joy and heartbreak, triumph and failure. Not so different really from the young soldier who'd made a promise to his dying brother all those years ago, just more worn down by time and consequence. I retrieved the shoebox from the fireproof safe, handling it gently, as if the memories inside might shatter if jostled too roughly. For a moment I considered listening to the tapes one last time, but decided against it. Those words belonged to Josh now. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. I timed my arrival for 3:30, figuring the service would be over, the wedding party busy with photographs. I could leave the box with someone, perhaps slip away before Josh even knew I'd been there. But when I parked across the street from the church, I saw that guests were still flowing out the doors. The ceremony had run long or perhaps started late. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching as beautifully dressed people gathered on the church steps. Laughter floated across the street along with the occasional pop of a champagne cork. And then I saw him. Josh, resplendent in a black tuxedo, his arm around a beautiful woman in white lace. Melissa, his bride. They stood at the top of the steps, receiving congratulations, their faces glowing with happiness. My breath caught in my throat. He looked so much like Thomas in that moment, the same proud set of the shoulders, the same crinkle around the eyes when he smiled. Before I could reconsider, I was out of the car, the shoebox tucked under my arm, crossing the street with purpose. A few guests glanced my way, but no one seemed to recognize me. I was a ghost in their midst, a figure from the past intruding on the present. I made it halfway up the church steps before Josh saw me. His smile faltered, then disappeared entirely. He whispered something to Melissa, who looked in my direction with a confused expression. Then he was moving toward me, his face a mask of controlled anger. "What are you doing here?" he asked when he reached me, his voice low but intense. "I wanted to give you this," I said, holding out the shoebox. "It's important, Josh. Please." He looked at the box as if it might contain something dangerous. "I didn't invite you." "I know," I acknowledged. "I'm not staying. These are recordings I made for you. Years ago. They explain everything. Things you should know." A muscle ticked in his jaw. Thomas's jaw, Robert's jaw, a genetic inheritance from both men who could claim some part of him. "Now? You want to explain things now? After 30 years of lies?" His voice had risen, drawing the attention of nearby guests. Susan appeared at the top of the steps, her expression shifting from surprise to something like triumph when she saw me. She started down toward us, but Jack caught her arm, holding her back. "Not here, Josh," I pleaded quietly. "This is your wedding day. I don't want to ruin it. Just take the box. Listen to it when you're ready." He looked torn, anger warring with the propriety of the occasion. Melissa approached cautiously, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Everything okay, honey?" she asked, her eyes moving from Josh to me with undisguised curiosity. Josh seemed to make a decision then. He straightened his shoulders, placed his arm around his new wife's waist, and said in a voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "You weren't invited, Mom. Go home." The word hung in the air between us. Mom. The same bizarre, inexplicable word he'd used at my nephew's wedding that had started this whole nightmare. I saw confusion flicker across Melissa's face. "Josh," she whispered, "I thought you said your mom passed away when you were 15. But Josh wasn't listening. He was staring at me with years of accumulated hurt and anger, using the word he knew would cut deepest, would humiliate me most thoroughly in front of this crowd of strangers. "Please leave," he said, his voice hard. "You're not welcome here." An older woman, Melissa's mother perhaps, stepped forward with a concerned expression. "Should I call someone?" she asked Josh, eyeing me as if I might be dangerous. "That won't be necessary," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. I set the shoebox down on the step between us. "Congratulations on your marriage. I wish you both every happiness." I turned and walked away then, my back straight despite the crushing weight of public rejection. Behind me I heard Susan's voice, though I couldn't make out her words. Some explanation to the curious onlookers, no doubt, further cementing whatever narrative she'd created about me. The drive home passed in a blur. Inside my house, the house where I'd raised Josh, where his height measurements still marked the kitchen doorframe, I carefully removed my suit and hung it away. Put on my old flannel robe. Sat in my recliner in the growing darkness, not bothering to turn on lights as day faded to evening. The telephone rang once, Mrs. Henderson from across the street, calling to tell me she'd seen the whole thing, that she thought it was just awful how they treated you, Frank. I thanked her politely, declined her offer to bring over a casserole, and gently ended the call. Springfield's rumor mill would be working overtime tonight, but I couldn't bring myself to care. As midnight approached, I finally rose from the chair, my joints protesting the hours of immobility. In the kitchen, I opened the cabinet above the refrigerator and took down the bottle of whiskey I kept for rare occasions, poured 2 fingers into a water glass and carried it to the table. I raised the glass in a silent toast to Thomas, to Louise, to promises kept and secrets buried, to Josh and his new bride, starting their life together without the burdens of the past. Perhaps that was for the best. Perhaps some truths were better left untold. But as I sipped the burning liquid, I couldn't help wondering what had happened to the shoebox. Had Josh taken it? Had someone thrown it away, thinking it trash left behind by a wedding crasher? Would those words, recorded decades ago with such care and hope, ever reach the ears they were intended for? That night, alone in the darkness, I faced the possibility that some stories remain unfinished. Some bridges once broken can never be rebuilt. And some fathers, whether by blood or by choice, must learn to live with the echo of a son's rejection. "You weren't invited, Mom. Go home." The words followed me into uneasy dreams, where I searched endless hallways for a son who always remained just out of reach. 3 weeks passed after the wedding. July settled over Springfield like a heavy blanket, bringing the kind of oppressive heat that makes even breathing feel like work. I developed a new routine. Morning coffee on the porch until the sun grew too intense, afternoons in front of the small window unit in my living room, evenings watching baseball games I didn't really care about on a TV that had seen better days. Mrs. Henderson brought casseroles despite my protests. Bill the mailman lingered longer than necessary, making awkward conversation that danced around what everyone in town now knew. Frank Reyes had been publicly rejected by the boy he'd raised. I was rinsing dishes one Tuesday evening when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. Probably another well-meaning neighbor with pity poorly disguised as friendly concern. But decades of good manners are hard to break, so I dried my hands and picked up on the 4th ring. "Hello?" At first there was nothing but silence, and I nearly hung up, assuming it was a robocall. Then I heard it, a ragged intake of breath, followed by a voice I would know anywhere. "Frank? It's Josh." My knees suddenly felt weak. I lowered myself onto one of the kitchen chairs, gripping the phone like a lifeline. "Josh," I said, his name coming out somewhere between a statement and a question. I found the tapes," he said, his voice unsteady. "Someone threw the box in the dumpster behind the church. The custodian saw it and thought it might be important, so he saved it. It sat in the church office for 2 weeks before Melissa's mom went to pick up some left-behind decorations and recognized my name on it." I closed my eyes, picturing the scenario. My carefully preserved memories tossed away like trash, rescued by the random kindness of a stranger. The universe's peculiar way of intervening when all seems lost. "I've been listening to them," Josh continued when I didn't respond. "All of them." I could hear the emotion in his voice, tightly controlled but present nonetheless. The tapes had affected him then. After all these years, my recorded words had finally reached their intended audience. "I see," I managed, not knowing what else to say. "What do you say to a son who has heard your deepest confessions, your most painful truths? Why didn't you ever tell me?" The question burst from him like water through a breaking dam. "All those years, Frank. All those chances to tell me the truth." I sighed heavily, the sound of a man carrying too much weight for too long. "I was keeping a promise to your father, to Thomas. He asked me to look after you and Louise, to be there for you both. And part of that meant protecting you from truths that might hurt more than help. You let me believe I was Thomas's son." "You are Thomas's son," I insisted. "He chose you. When he found out Louise was pregnant, when he suspected the baby might not be biologically his, he chose to love you anyway. And when he was dying, he made me promise to continue that love." "But Robert is my biological father," Josh pressed. "Yes," I acknowledged. "That's what the DNA test showed. But biology isn't everything, Josh. Family is complicated." A humorless laugh came through the line. "You're telling me?" We both fell silent, miles and decades and unspoken words stretching between us. In the last tape, Josh finally said, his voice softer now, you said something. You said, I may not have been your father by blood, but I was the only man who stayed when everyone else left. What did you mean by that? The question caught me off guard. Of all the revelations on those tapes, that's what he wanted to know about. Just what I said, I replied carefully. Robert wasn't there for you growing up. He had his own life, his own family. Thomas died before you were born. And me? I was there, every day, for everything. That's all I meant. But why did you stay? Josh pressed. You could have walked away after Louise died. I wasn't your responsibility, not really. Especially once I started pushing you away, spending time with Jack and Susan. Why didn't you just let me go? The question broke my heart all over again. Had he really never understood? Had I failed so completely in showing him what he meant to me? Because I loved you, I said simply, the words inadequate for the depth of feeling behind them. From the first moment I held you in that apartment, you were mine, Josh. Not by blood, not by law, but by choice. Every day I chose you, even when you stopped choosing me back. I heard what might have been a stifled sob on the other end of the line. When Josh spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Frank, I need to see you. Can I come over? I glanced around my kitchen, dishes half-washed in the sink, linoleum floor in need of sweeping, the general shabbiness of an old man living alone. None of it mattered. Yes, I said. Of course. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I paced my small living room, straightened magazines that didn't need straightening, wiped down surfaces already clean. When the doorbell finally rang, my heart was hammering so hard I was sure he would hear it. I opened the door to find Josh standing on my porch, looking both familiar and strange. He wore jeans and a polo shirt, casual clothes that somehow emphasized how much he'd changed from the boy who once ran through this house. His face was drawn, eyes red-rimmed from what I suspected were recently shed tears. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then, without a word, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. The embrace was awkward at first. We hadn't hugged in years. But then something shifted, and suddenly we were holding on to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. I'm sorry, he whispered against my shoulder. I'm so sorry. I didn't ask what he was apologizing for, the years of distance, the public rejection at the wedding, the word mom used as a weapon. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that he was here, in the home where he'd grown up, reaching across the chasm that had separated us for too long. We moved to the living room, sitting on the old sofa where we'd once watched Saturday morning cartoons together. Josh held a small cassette player in his hands, my old one, the same one I'd used to record the tapes all those years ago. He'd kept it, apparently. When Susan told me you weren't really my uncle, that you'd been lying to me my whole life, I was so angry, he said quietly. She made it sound like you'd been manipulating everyone, pretending to care about me to, I don't know, steal Thomas's legacy or something. He shook his head. It sounds ridiculous now, but I believed her. Susan always resented Louise, I explained, and by extension me for supporting her. When Thomas died, Jack and Susan thought Louise should have given you to them to raise, since they couldn't have children of their own. They never forgave us for keeping you. Josh nodded slowly. In the tapes you mentioned that, but you never said anything negative about them, even knowing what they thought of you. I shrugged. They're still family. Family, Josh repeated, turning the cassette player over in his hands. I've been thinking a lot about what that word really means since listening to these. He pressed play, and my voice, younger but unmistakably mine, filled the room. Josh, maybe I wasn't your father by blood, but I was the only man who stayed when everyone else was gone. Josh stopped the tape, his fingers trembling slightly. Why did you call me Joshua Franklin Reyes? Was it because you knew even then that you were more my father than anyone else? The question struck me like a physical blow. All these years, and he had never known the full significance of his middle name. No, Josh, I said gently. I didn't choose your middle name. Louise did. She named you after me because she knew, I think, that I would always be there for you, that I would love you as my own. A single tear slid down Josh's cheek. He wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. I've been so stupid, he said, so blind. I reached over and covered his hand with mine, the same hand that had once dwarfed his tiny fingers as I taught him to tie his shoes. We all have our blind spots, I said, especially when it comes to family. He nodded, then asked the question I could see had been weighing on him. Do you think you can forgive me for everything? I smiled, feeling the weight of decades lifting from my shoulders. There's nothing to forgive, son. Nothing at all. The tapes are with him now. All of them. My voice from the past, preserving truths I was too afraid to speak in the present. Sometimes when I visit Josh and Melissa's home for Sunday dinner, a regular occurrence now, I catch the sound of a tape rewinding in his study. The mechanical whir, that distinctive click when it reaches the beginning. And I'm reminded that truth, no matter how long delayed, has a sound all its own. All it needs is someone willing to listen. Sometimes the secrets we keep to protect those we love become the very walls that separate us from them. For 50 years, I carried the weight of a promise made to my dying brother, believing that silence was the greatest gift I could give Josh. But in the end, it was truth. Painful, complicated, long-delayed truth that finally built a bridge across the chasm between us. I wonder, what would you have done? Would you have broken your promise to the dead to spare the living years of misunderstanding? Or would you have carried that burden alone, as I did, until time made the choice for you? Family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's defined by the people who stay when everyone else leaves. The ones who choose you, day after day, even when you stop choosing them back. Josh and I lost decades to secrets and whispers, but we found our way back to each other in the end. Not as uncle and nephew, not as father and son in any traditional sense, but as two people bound by something deeper than DNA. A love that survived betrayal, distance, and the passage of time itself. That kind of love, I've learned, never truly dies. It just waits in silence for someone willing to hear its voice again. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes we all need a reminder that it's never too late to speak our truth or to listen to someone else's. Follow this channel for more stories that explore the complicated, beautiful mess that is family, in all its forms. What secrets are you keeping? What truths are you afraid to speak? The answers may hurt at first, but as I learned at 78 years old, they might also set you free.